Loomis, and that is the onus for a lot of us participating in this process. With that said, these meetings are meant to be productive, positive, and informative. Our task at hand is to add our value as we see it to our general plan, and we will hear all sorts of views and opinions. We need to hear your opinions and ideas, and you should feel that this is a safe environment to do so. This is a democratic function, and sometimes we may not agree with each other, and that's okay. However, please do not use the time you are given to attack anyone personally. Rather, focus on the topic you disagree on. As your chair, I will not tolerate any verbal personal confrontations of any kind. This is not the place for that. Okay, so let's start. And more information. Pursuant to Executive Order N2920, certain provisions of the Open Meeting Act are suspended due to a state of emergency in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Consistent with the executive order, the 2020 General Plan Update Land Use Subcommittee meeting will be held via Zoom format. And you can, there on our agenda, there's instructions how you can participate in the meeting via Zoom. Once you're inside the Zoom platform, you use your raise your hand function and the clerk will allow you to speak and after you unmute. All right, so we've already called to order. Let's do the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, roll call, please.
Okay, Chairperson Jen Clark-Kretz.
Here.
Vice Chair Bonnie London.
Here.
Ryan D. Martini.
Here.
Patrick Panikvar.
Here.
Panikvar, I'll get it, I promise.
No worries.
Jesse Lunsford.
Here.
Nancy Nordlund.
Here.
Nicole Reading. Auxiliary Jeff Duncan. And auxiliary member Jean Wilson.
No, you're unmuted now. So if you want to mute it, you got to hit over here and you push mute. And if you want to raise your hand, you go.
Okay.
Thank you. Now is the time for committee comment for items not on the agenda. Does anybody in our committee have anything they want to talk about that is not on the agenda?
Will, raise your hand. Seeing none.
Are there any public members that would like to speak for items that are not on the agenda?
Oh, I'm just bringing Jeff Duncan in.
Okay.
Any public members, if you wish to speak, you may raise your hand. Seeing none.
Okay. All right, now we will, hi Jeff. Now we will have a motion perhaps to adopt the agenda tonight. Do I have a motion from the committee?
Move to adopt it.
I second.
Hey, may we have a roll call, please?
Yes, who gave the first?
Ryan.
Ryan, got it, thanks. Okay, and let's go with our vote. Jan Clark-Kretz.
Aye.
Bonnie London.
Yes.
Ryan D. Martini.
Yes.
Patrick Panikvar.
Yes.
Jesse Lunsford.
Yes.
Nancy Nordlund. And that's it. Thanks.
Thank you. All right. We are now going to move on to our consent agenda, which includes our minutes. And does anybody have any questions about the consent agenda? Or is there any, and if not here, is there any public that has any questions about our consent agenda?
Seeing none.
Okay.
And just to go with the same thing I said at the last meeting, Jan, these first couple meetings, the comments were written as items of discussion and items and points of discussion. And in the subsequent, all the subsequent meetings, those are going to be coming out as minutes that we see in any of the other ones with the names and who made comments. And the format's set up just a little bit so that we're working with committee comments, public comments, and then if we're going to come back and make any recommendations, we'll do it at that time.
Okay.
And then also, as I stated earlier, in all the subsequent meetings, the link for this video will be right on the minutes. So you can always click back to it if you're looking for a little bit more clarification without having to search.
That's excellent. Thank you so much. Appreciate you all doing that. It's going to be very helpful. All right, then I guess we will need a motion to accept the consent agenda.
I move to accept the consent agenda.
Second.
Okay, and a roll call, please.
Okay. Jan Clark-Kretz,
Yes.
Bonnie London,
Yes.
Ryan DiMartini,
Yes.
Patrick Ponekvar,
Yes.
Jesse Lunsford,
Yes.
Nancy Nordlund. And that's all of us. Thanks.
Great. Thank you very much. We're going to move on to committee matters and Mary Beth.
Yes, welcome everybody. Thanks for being here on our second round of this committee and your meeting. We're going to forego introductions. We all know each other by this point in time. So I would just like to present Mark Teague from Placeworks. He's your technical staff on this subcommittee, and he has a very lively presentation for you.
I don't know. Thank you, Mary Beth.
If you could hold your comments till after the presentation. And attendees, so non-committee members, you will be given the opportunity to speak after the committee has discussed, and we'll pop you in and out of that to provide your content to the discussion. So thanks again. Take it away, Mark.
Mary Beth, you need to let me share, please. There we go. Thank you, Mary Beth. Hopefully you can all see this, my screen. You're seeing a PowerPoint, I hope, or at least the beginning of one. Outstanding. All right, so without further ado, let's go through. We've done this. So today's goal is to, again, focus on the 10,000 foot view and the land use categories that we think may or may not work. We have a very focused area for our subcommittee review, and so we should need to talk a little bit about the discussion. And Andy asked that I talk a little bit about how projects happen in California. And I'm going to use some percentages here. As you know, most statistics are made up, or I'd say 85% of statistics are made up. But generally it works like this. We get a lot of applicants that are potential applicants come to the counter. We never see them again. We get more applicants that come to the counter and may actually go through the application process, and the project never goes anywhere. We even get some applicants that come to the counter, go through the application process, and never build anything. So one of the questions that was raised at the last meeting is, we have an application that covers part of our area. Why are we still doing this? Because there's a better than average chance it may never go anywhere. And we still need to talk about land uses, and we still need to talk about things at the 30,000 foot level for the town. And it is a worthwhile discussion for us to have and possibly end up in the general plan. If something else happens, that's great. That often happens in planning, where we are going one way and then something happens and we go another way. But at least that was a question that Andy asked that I bring up at the very beginning, so we can at least understand that that's why we're still doing what we're doing. We do want to avoid necessarily focusing on a specific project, We want to look instead at the overall policy framework that we're talking about. However, it's necessary to have a conversation about what we want things to look like or how we want those things to come together. That's just the human condition. At our previous subcommittee meeting on the other side of the interstate, I actually pulled up part of the municipal code, so they could actually see the zoning table as it's presented in there, because it helps ground us in the framework of what we're doing. As I mentioned very early on, the general plan sets the foundation for the zoning code, which is where the work really happens. So since the last meeting, we've all met once. We know that we're going to be making recommendations to the main land use committee. And I have received some photos from some of you on things you like and things you don't like. Keep them coming. I think they're amazing. And I'm hoping at the next meeting to share some of those with everybody. And I'm hoping to get a few more. It would be nice to have ideas about edges. Try to pay attention to how some of the places that you appreciate treat the transition between a more intensive use or what you perceive to be a more intensive use. Now, intensity can be people, it can be buildings, it can be light, it can be landscaping. There's all sorts of ways to define intensity, leaving that to your own imagination. But where there's a transition, where you're going from something that's like this, that isn't like anything else, to something like that isn't like anything else. Those transitions are where planners focus. It's the crevices that matter. And for those of you that are on the open space thing, sometimes that's where we put open space. It's nice to let nature back in or sunlight into those areas. So obviously this is the area that we're talking about. We have a number of land use designations. And obviously this will be some interesting discussion. There's some open space in the area. There are constraints, and we'll need to be talking through how the transitions and how fitting in a very real sense, this is an infill area. There's already existing development, and how that transition happens will obviously matter to those folks and businesses that are already there. This is the area for the project that is in pre-application stage, is not even to the formal application stage. But I wanted to be able to have this on here so that we can see that there's still area within our purview that is worth us discussing. And certainly the transitions and how they all come together matter. And so I won't belabor the point. I took the time to take the abbreviations from this map and attach them to the land use designations that are in the general plan, because often there's a disconnect, and I wanted you to see them, and then I tried to put them on one slide. That meant that I took some of the text out of there. So please, if you want to read the rest of the text, go back to the general plan or the previous slides. I actually left them on the bottom of this PowerPoint presentation, Mary Beth. So when I send this to you, it'll have what was there originally at the very bottom. We had put all the text in there, but it was like 4 slides, and for our purposes, it doesn't really matter. When the subcommittee makes its recommendation, I would anticipate you perhaps tweaking some of the wording that's on here and talking through how you want things to do. In the previous committee, I thought we made some great progress today, and for those of us that do this on a regular basis, it was really cool. And what we talked about was how you wanted things to look. And I'd like us to get to that place today as well, if we can. What does rural mean to you? What does urban mean to you? What does downtown mean to you? What does commercial mean to you? Because then what we can do as planners is we do bullet items. It means this, it means that, it means this. And then we can actually make those policy statements or put them in the definitions. The words matter because, as we've mentioned many times, landowners go first to the general plan, then to the zoning code, and now we do it all online. Back when I first started, the pharaohs had to come to me to ask where the pyramids went. So now they can look that up online and figure out where they all go. And then they come to me and they say, well, I've looked it up and this is what it says. And then I have to go, well, that's really not what we meant. And then the arguments begin. So what I would rather we do is focus on what we want, let us put it in planerese, and then feed it back to you so that you can say, yep, that's close, or no, that isn't. These are the existing goals from your land use element. Get used to them. We'll be visiting them on a regular basis. There may be too many, there may not be enough. That is really up to the town. A goal is an aspirational end game. It may or may not happen within the horizon of the general plan. It may never happen. It used to be that we had goals about peace on earth and goodwill to all men. And we've kind of moved away from sort of the really lofty goals and really focused on what the community wants to see. Sometimes most of the discussion happens around these goals, and then we build policies, objectives, programs necessary to move toward the goal. And so some of this is important because it sets the stage and really starts to craft the vision that we kind of talked about previously, and what do we envision for our town. That's why the words matter. The definitions matter, because I can't remember, I think our attorney's here. Attorneys really weigh on every single word. In the thesaurus next to pedantic, there's a picture of an attorney. So we also stress on that as well. And I will ask definitions. What are we doing? Why is this here? Is this what you mean? To the point that many general plans have a glossary, or they have a definitions page similar to you'd have for a zoning code or any other book. Also, because it's the 21st century, we can put pictures in our general plan, which is why we ask you for pictures of things you want to see. This is a policy that specifically deals, I believe, with the area that we're talking about. There are words in here. We need to talk about them. One of the things that Jean brought up on a previous committee meeting was we sometimes have narrative in here that doesn't show up on the map. I hate that with a passion, because people will look at pictures before they're going to read all the words. Now, I read the words because I'm a planner, but many people will look at the pictures. So if there's something that we want to make happen, whether it's a transition, whether it is a buffer, whether, I don't care, needs to show up on the map in some form or on a map. It doesn't need to be on the main map, but it can be an illustration that describes car alarms. It can be an illustration that shows what the town wants to see and can be pointed to by the planner, the council, the commission, or just about anybody. See, this is what we're looking for. And that includes not only, the plan view of buffers and whatnot, but the images that we're talking about of what we'd like to see in our community. So here's the area. This is what I said at the beginning. These are some of the focus things that we'd like to talk about. What kind of transitions do you want to see? What does the back of the property look like? I know communities that want to have a view from the freeway that is more representative of them as a community and not just an afterthought by the part of development. And that sometimes is difficult to provide because freeways are noisy, they're not particularly beautiful, but they do require, in these communities, they require landscaping, they require attention to that detail. So it isn't like your backyard or the behind the shed where you don't really let visitors see. It may be something that you want to present as the front door to the town. Again, entirely up to the subcommittee. Are there needs in the community that have not been met that we should address in the plan? Now, sometimes this may be a particular use. I don't know, Jan may want a water slide downtown. It's up to Jan. But at the end of the day, there may be something specific that this committee would like to see in the downtown, and we can deal with it. Now, from a planning perspective, we can focus almost entirely on what something looks like. And in the planning world, we call that a form-based code. And that means we focus more on what the buildings look like and how they interact with the environment than we do on the uses that go in them. And sometimes that's beneficial, sometimes it isn't. I am cautious about some of those codes because they end up looking like Disneyland. They may be pretty, but they also look fake. And that was something that was brought up and has been brought up on several subcommittees. We want this to be a real community, and we want these to be real uses. And sometimes not having everything perfectly groomed is exactly what we're looking for. And we can talk more about that and how that gets implemented later on. And then, of course, the definitions, we've talked about that already. So here are goals and policies. Do you still capture the vision for the town? We talked a little bit about that last time. What is the vision? And I think it's possible to have a single overriding vision for the community and also visionettes, if you will, for portions of the community. For example, we've talked about a definition of rural that applies to the rural estate and the areas that are pretty far from the downtown. We may have a different definition of what a rural downtown looks like. And I've seen some pictures that others have brought in that I can share in the next PowerPoint that we have. Those are the types of things. We don't have to have a single, it's not like the Lord of the Rings. We don't need a single definition to bind them all. But we need to be precise on where we think certain things appear. And that's how land use designations happen, and that's how zoning districts happen. Our normal homework, I would recommend that you read that provision of the general plan because this is just a short summary. I believe there's some marketing information that's been placed on the town's site. And of course, what I love about these subcommittees is many of you do additional work outside of it and share it during the subcommittee. This last one, Eden had provided a definition of rural as reported by UC Davis. And that was kind of fun to read. It's only 2 pages. And I'm sure that'll end up on the town's website as information. So anything you bring up, we'll add onto the site. And that's it, Chair.
Okay, can you go back to the slide that you had? I think it was after this one that talked about, yeah, if you could, no, sorry, go back. It was actually, it was our, no, back. Keep going. Keep going. It was the, actually, it was the description of the land use of the project area. I think you had it. Where is that at? Wasn't there one more that just had a one description on it for this existing?
One more, Mark.
One. Thank you.
I'll leave it there.
So again, I know that you pulled this out of our general plan in for your PowerPoint, and I was just trying to find that in the general plan. And it's general commercial and office, right? Okay. Okay, I see. So if we could go back to the map of the entire area for the committee. And thank you, by the way, Mark. I think it's really helpful to see the project that was proposed. I like how you map that out to indicate that there's still quite a bit of land there. So looking at all those different designations, it looks like actually part of that proposed project will go out into outside of our area there a little bit. So does anybody on the committee have any questions about any of the land use designations or about the map or about the area of our purview? No. Nobody?
Nobody.
Oh, Jean does.
There's Jean. Go ahead, Jean. Unmute.
Okay.
There you go.
I had a question about the map. The 2 maps that were seen. Oh, first a comment on that the part about the specific area that was written for the general plan, the 2001. And then when the village came through, the village PD in some aspects got done in by the referendum, but the general plan changes that they made did not get done in. That was not on the referendum. I asked somebody why, and they said the lawyer told them that you can't do the general plan change by referendum. It just can't be done that way, so it wasn't included. I don't know if that's the real reason, but that's what I was told. So that specific plan part was written for the old one and was not followed through, obviously, on the village because they didn't do any transition between office and commercial and residential. But it's still in the text there of the general plan, and probably it's going to need some work to figure out what we want to do there. As far as the maps, both of the maps showing are the Hidden Grove project maps. But what I'm wondering is what was the general plan that was left by the village? Because as far as I know, that's the current general plan that is in the works. I mean, that's what would guard what we are doing. That's what guides everything. And I'm looking at this one, and I see the wetlands, which is a little blue triangle, and then it continues through. But they've got streets through there, and so I know that this is not matching up with what the village project was, because that wetlands goes on through, and it makes me wonder how they're planning to do this, because the other one was approved by Army Corps and they were not allowed to go through here. Actually, Todd had to move where his road could go because Army Corps didn't want him to go through. So I'm just wondering, could we see sometime a map comparing what is in the general plan as it was changed by the village compared to this map that we're looking at here, so we have a better idea of how the two compare?
Gene, this is the general plan as adopted by the village. So this is the official adopted general plan for the town of Lewis. These are the uses that were adopted and have not changed. So the referendum changed the zoning, but it did not change the general plan land use designations. And that's what you see. The other thing the referendum did was it eliminated the development agreement, and it eliminated the planned development approach to this. So it just leaves the land use designations and.
But so this is the village's plan, not Hidden Grove's plan. What we're seeing here.
This is the general plan for the town of Loomis. The only thing that shows up for Hidden Grove is the black crosshatch, and that's the area that Hidden Grove has submitted a pre-application. But the land uses are those that were adopted by the town of Loomis with the villages.
But the village had that wetlands going all the way through and no roads crossing up there. That's puzzling to me.
Those roads are existing. That's an existing subdivision. So
below that, right below that triangle?
Correct.
So maybe I haven't seen that map in enough detail yet to understand what I'm looking at. That's probably the case then.
If I may, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Gene, but I think what Gene's pointing out is that on the village plan, the road didn't dissect the wetlands area. They used the Dock Barnes road at the bottom of the wetlands. Is that what you're talking about, Gene? And now
I'm not understanding this map, I think. Maybe I haven't seen a big enough copy of it.
Mark, can you just blow up that map? I can't read the road names, but the villages only went up to the top of the black crosshatched area. That is exactly the same limit as the villages. That doesn't change.
Right. So what I was hoping to do was show you the aerial, but I can blow up the map here.
Yeah, if you could just blow that up so we can see the names, but.
Well, the names kind of get blurry.
They sure do.
Because it's not a vector image, but here is the aerial of that. So these are the roadways. Can you see the aerial?
Yes.
Okay, so this is Starbucks. It says Starbucks everywhere. All right, so there's a Starbucks, and this is the area we're talking about. And you can see these roads already exist. So if I put these side by side, if I have the ability to do that, bear with me, folks. Oops, that's not what I wanted.
Bonnie's next whenever we're ready.
Well, I was
Got
just
it.
going to say, Jean, that blue part that's right in the middle, I think that might be the wetlands because now they have it designated as park.
No, I mean the triangle, the blue triangle at the top.
Okay, so
That would
here's,
be the school, Loomis Grammar School, I
Oh,
believe.
the school. Okay, it's
Right.
not the wetlands. Okay,
no, this
I'm
is, the blue
I'm
is,
oriented now. I'm okay. So
okay,
part of our area actually includes subdivisions that are already in place.
that is correct.
Okay.
So Lucy, would you make a note that let's make sure next time we have an aerial photograph so we can provide some context. It is a little disorienting just to see the colored map. I should have thought of that. So I'll take this off now since you can discuss, but there's you can see as Andy was talking about, this is Sun Knoll Road, this is Day Avenue. You can see them here. You can see Eldon. This is all existing.
Okay, I'm fine now.
No,
Thank you,
it's very
Bonnie.
good. Thank you, Jean.
Okay, so now that we see all of the different land uses, and I don't know, is there anybody else that has any questions about those land uses? Is there anybody on the public that has any questions?
Yes.
Okay,
Carrie, you may proceed. You, yeah.
Unmute. Okay, so folks can hear me.
Yeah.
Okay, so just trying to understand.
we lost her.
Uh-oh, do you still have me or not?
Yeah, you're here.
Yes.
Okay, so I was looking earlier today on plans that were the villages and what that plan was versus, I guess, the submission that's been done for or pre-plan for Hidden Grove. One of the things that's different that I see on the Hidden Grove when you're talking about the wetlands and so forth is it does have Library Drive going through the larger blue area. And then that's very different than what villages had. So I just want to make sure that I'm on the same page with everybody on that.
Yeah, that's correct. That's a preliminary plan that hasn't been reviewed yet.
Okay.
And so it does differ. They also show Dock Barnes as a reservation rather than as being constructed. So there's a fair amount of discussion I think the town staff will have with the applicants.
Okay.
About their project, and we have not begun that process yet.
Okay, and then from what I understand, the village's plan was it has more density than what the Hidden Grove plan has, and when it came to measures C and D that Loomis voted on, is the village's plan even still viable, or what's being looked at this point in time?
The village's plan is dead.
Okay, good. Yay, thank you.
Just for clarity, though, the villages did not, the land use designations in the general plan that were adopted with the villages are in existence because they were not removed, and that's what you see on this graphic.
Okay.
And also the environmental document was not challenged, and so that environmental document still exists. But as far as the subdivision map, the tentative map, the development agreement, and the planned unit development, all of those were abolished, and the zoning.
Okay.
So all those things were abolished. So at this point in time, there is, other than the pre-application, no plans for this area. So.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Bonnie?
And just so that I'm clear on our objective today, it's again to take that 10,000 foot view. Again, we don't have an application in front of us. And so it's for us as a group to kind of, provide a vision as to how we want this area to be used. And so, you know, given the land use designations, given the issues that we had with the village, given the original general plan and all of the input that went into that, including the town center master plan, my take was that, you know, it was intended to be a very pedestrian friendly, walkable community. Originally a mix of commercial that, you know, is been decreased. I mean, there's still the town center portion, and then the general commercial where Raley's is currently at. I think, you know, again, from what I recall of a lot of the input that was made during the past couple of years, I think that there was a desire for connectivity, so that, you know, not just automobile with Dock Barnes Drive, which was, you know, many people felt was essential, but also active transportation with walking, with bikes, and those sorts of things. And since we have a school that also connects here, and we know that a lot of times, a lot of parents didn't feel safe having the kids walking along the major thoroughways, such as Horseshoe Bar or Taylor, having trails that would be able to connect from any residential, you know, to the schools, I think would be desirable.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, Bonnie. And again, if I hate to ask you to go back to that one slide again, which was the description prior to the general plan change, because I know that, yeah, there's pretty specific things in here. And also inside of our general plan, I believe it, again, I mirror what Bonnie says, definitely talked about being very walkable and making sure that things were easy to access by pedestrians, by bike or ped. All right.
Just to be clear, this language is part of the general plan, and therefore, if a project comes in, such as Hidden Grove, they are required to comply with this language.
But this is the prior one. This
doesn't matter. It's still in the general plan. They shall comply.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay. I gotcha.
There is no choice. So just so you're aware, the town has looked at their pre-application, determined it wasn't complete. We have submitted it back to them. And part of that return was a very lengthy Excel spreadsheet with every single goal, policy, implementation measure that they have to demonstrate how they're in compliance with.
Okay, let's go back to the main map again, because I know we were talking about those commercial properties. Can we make it a little bigger to see by chance? Okay, so we were talking about, I believe it's the two parcels there. I don't know if they're called, they're right along the road there. We were going to try to get in touch with the owners of that property, I think, if I remember right from our last meeting, to see if there was any indication from them that they wanted to perhaps change their land use. I don't know if anybody has reached out to them, Bonnie or Mary Beth?
No, and I don't know which road you're referring to. I'm sorry.
I believe it's the Paul Johnson property and the...
Oh, the town center commercials? Yeah.
We mentioned that. Did we?
I leave those type of matters in Sean Rabay's hands, our town manager. So I've been in contact with Paul Johnson on a different matter, but he's meeting with Sean to discuss this portion. You know, he's looking for ways to develop his parcel in compliance with zoning and general plan, mixed use commercial, in trying to get something to pencil out. So, you know, he kind of goes back and forth with plan this and do that. And so we're kind of in a little holding pattern there. And the last time I talked to him, it was directing him to talk to Sean.
The other thing I think we ought to do is, this is affecting another committee's purview, this new potential project. And I don't think that that particular committee is aware of that. So maybe we could make a note, and I believe it's the downtown core.
Actually, they're aware of this project.
I think I know they're aware of it, but I don't think that I'd like to see this map just like this for them so that they can see where that project's going to extend out to. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Mark, I think that's something you can do for that next downtown core meeting.
Duly noted by the person who will actually make that happen. Thank you, Lucy.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
I have one attendee that has a hand raised. And before I let her in, I just want to tell the whole committee that I posted on our chat the link to the market analysis that was done by the city. So it's a direct link. It's on our website, but at least this way you can just click there, open it up, and save it for later. Carrie, you may talk.
General plan for the town of Loomis, does it have within it the number of dwelling units that would be applicable for this area? Because from what I understood kind of back in this Measure C and D days was that the plan had in there that it was 220 unit maximum for that area, but I'm not sure if that understanding is right or wrong.
Christy, do you recall those numbers?
No, I know that it does allow for increased density of 20 units an acre on that area that was in the village. But there isn't a maximum number that I am aware of.
And will that come up in the housing element for the vacant sites inventory and then tie back to land use and what could potentially be built?
Yes, that vacant land table that's in the housing element that will identify an estimate of the number of units that would be on there.
Okay, and that housing element is later in this meeting, or is part of a different document, or where would that be?
It's a separate committee, the
Okay.
housing committee. Our website has the administrative draft housing element with it, along with the goals, policies, and objectives. And we are just today finalizing the vacant sites map. So as soon as we get that, it will be under the housing section also.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
If it please the chair, let me go a little further. The only thing the housing element's going to show you is certain lands attributable to the arena. We'll have a table, and we already have one in the settings section, that takes the existing vacant land as we understand it. Now, please understand we're still fiddling with that a little bit, so it may change in there. But in the settings section that is on the town's website, if you scroll down, you'll find a table where we've applied the general plan densities to the vacant land as we understand it. So each of these designations will have a density or density range associated with them. And then we do an assumed development based on that, which would give you an approximation of the number of units in the area. But I don't recollect there being any cap for this area other than the designation caps.
Is there any more public comment out there?
No, Madam Chair. Oh, here we go. One more. Carrie, you may proceed.
Yeah, and I was just going to ask, Mark, when you were saying that that was out there, the table that was out there, where is that something I can look at, or where is that located?
It's in the settings section on the, if you go to the town's website for the general plan update, you'll see that there's setting documents. You'll need to scroll down because there's a bunch of them. You
Okay.
go to the one for land use, and if you pop
Okay.
that open, it'll look like a dog's breakfast because there's lots of changes in there, and they're all in
Okay.
track changes. But if you scroll down, there should be a table, an Excel table excerpt in there that should show you vacant land by land use designation, and then each of the columns will show that. If you can't find it, email Mary Beth, and I'll make sure you get a copy of it.
Okay, awesome. Thank you very much.
Anytime.
And I just posted that document link into the chat, if that's, so it's readily available for everybody.
Okay, awesome.
One other place, if you want to calculate it yourself, is the town did an analysis of the villages and the existing land uses by acres. So you could take a look at the land use, what's allowed in the land use, multiply it by the acres in that land use. And Mary Beth, where is that spreadsheet where we did that analysis located?
I think it's tied to, let me verify.
But land use by acres, because there's, all of the wetlands and stuff. So
Correct. Those are also identified as wetlands.
okay. Okay.
So that spreadsheet actually breaks it down by parcel. So you look at the land use designations on this graphic. There are actual multiple parcels within here. So the table is an Excel spreadsheet broken down, and it shows the by parcel, the land use designation, the number of acres of that designation, and if the zoning is compliant, and if it's not compliant, what compliant zoning would be. So it's a fairly lengthy table, and there are graphics, maps going along with it to help clarify that.
Okay. Okay, thank you so much.
And I don't see it where I'm looking for it is on our website under past projects under the villages, but I don't see that referenced there. So I'll find it and put it there though.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. So Mark, why don't you give us your recommendation again, what we need to get done before we meet again.
Well, could I ask a question? Of the land uses that you see on this graphic, are there any that you disagree with? Just to start, or the other way is, are those land uses that you agree with and we shouldn't touch them? I mean, that's kind of the first question.
Mm-hmm.
I have 2 committee members with their hand raised whenever you're ready to proceed that way.
Whoever's first.
Bonnie, go ahead.
All right, so I wanted to clarify when Anders made the comment that even though the development agreement and the land use changes were made in the general plan, the development agreement was essentially gone through the referendum, as was the zoning. And this is the zoning that we ended up with, yet in the general plan, there was still the language about having the general commercial and the town center commercial. I think I'm just a little bit confused about the difference between the language that's still in the general plan and then the zoning. And I guess that's probably that inconsistency that you've been referring to. That would be number one. And then I guess number two, I'm also, I think, trying to step back away from the specific developments at hand and trying to get that, again, 30,000 foot view of what we want, what we would envision this area to be. And so I guess, with that, I know that we have the library that's located there. As a library lover, I would love to see that area enhanced with more civic activity, have a more use for the public to be able to enjoy, especially if you have now designated park space where they are not able to develop because of the wetlands. Again, more connectivity to that so that it doesn't just stop and go. I think that that's kind of a problem that we have in the town. And then in terms of, we do need housing. we do need commercial, we need office space. Loomis is small. We're kind of, landlocked, and there's a lot of barriers with the train and with the freeway. And so it's kind of like, how do we balance that throughout? With the housing, I think what I heard a lot of the discussion is that they didn't want, kind of cookie cutter homes. And from my take on Loomis, Loomis does like to be different. Loomis is kind of eclectic. And so I think having a variety of housing types and not just having it be kind of a standard. And again, going back to the pedestrian friendly, something that's very, walkable. When I know that I had sent Mark some slides or some pictures of places that my husband stayed when we went to Sonoma. And even just walking around in downtown Sonoma, I mean, it was so much fun because it's not overwhelming. It's still fairly small. I think the population's around 10,000. Definitely walkable from where we were located into the town square. And so this would actually be kind of around the same distance from where we stayed to walk into the town square. And that area, again, it was very different. You had different pockets of different types of housing types. And I think just that variety kind of gives it a nice blend. And I think that, I haven't really poured through their, design standards. I think that they're fairly strict though, just because the styles, the architecture, whether it was new or old, it was very, just aesthetically pleasing. There was a lot of, natural elements, old existing trees. I think that they have to build around them as opposed to being able to take them out, freely. So those are just my input.
If it please the chair, can we unpack a little bit of that? Picking on you, Bonnie, because thank you for the photos that are awesome. So to a planner, when you say a variety of housing, that covers everything from high density to small lot to you name it, everything in between. So for Loomis, what would be appropriate? What do you think? And is it a view thing? If I can show you high density that looks like it's a cottage, or is it we just don't want that many people in one spot? One of the things that I find almost just enjoyable is when I see something that I like, and then I go back and actually do the math, and I find out, well, this little cottage sits on about a 3,000 square foot parcel. And if you do the math, we're looking at, oh my goodness, 20 units or 30 units to the acre. Is it a view that you're looking at, or is it the actual density? Let's unpack that a little bit, just because you were awesome and sent me some killer photos that I can't wait to share.
So are you talking to me? You want me to answer that?
That would be a good start. It might get the conversation going. That was my thought.
Okay. Well, actually, I mean, there's two different, one thing that I noticed is that they did have some high density, but it was, they had the intensity, but it was invisible intensity, if that makes any sense, in that it didn't look like it was just too much. An example that I would give is that they had this beautiful craftsman that looks like it would have been originally, a lovely, manor in the day. But when you look closely, it's actually an apartment building that, had multi-units in there. That would be one. The other thing, though, is I know that builders or developers are incentivized to try to use as much of the parcel size or parcel lot as possible, just because it's kind of a one fee for all, whether it's a big house or a little house. In the older days, they had the same or even smaller size lots, but they didn't build the entire home on that lot. The homes were smaller as well. And so, again, being able to, I guess, have more of the lot available for trees and lawns and those sorts of things. And some of them did go up instead of out, but up being maybe, again, two stories as opposed to three in a town the size of Loomis. I'm trying to think of some other things, but yeah, even, again, walking on the main street, we would look and they did have some alley loaded lots, but they weren't in view of the main streets. You kind of had to look for them. And when you kind of looked into them, they were actually, again, quite charming. It didn't feel all concrete. There felt like there was more of, just felt a little bit more intimate. And I guess another example I would give that I can actually relate to is if you go down to McKinley Park in Sacramento, right across from McKinley Park, there's this cute little, again, kind of I would say it's not even an acre, but they have about maybe 6 to 10 tiny little cottages, and they're tucked in there, but they've got this community area space, and so even though there's a bit of density in there, it feels small and intimate. So I hope that can give you an example, or give you a better idea of what's in my head.
That's beautiful. Thank you. Jean has her hand in the chair.
Yep.
Well, I was one of the people that got to do Robert's little survey, and one of the things he showed us were all these pictures of different kinds of buildings, and I was amazed at how many units were in some of those. And so I thought, well, the people in Loomis that are afraid of density, they need to see some other kinds of things than what they think is the only way that you can do apartments. Other kinds of houses, other kinds of housing that probably is our standard model for more intense units. And I was thinking back to when Ralph worked at Caltech, and we were in an older 4-unit apartment building, but we didn't think of it all that much. As it was an older 30s building and had that classic look, and 2 units up, 2 units down. But if you looked at it from the street, because of the way it was laid out, you had to look twice to even realize that there was more than that. It wasn't just a single family home, and there were several in the area. I think there are things that we can do with. This is probably the weeds for this particular group, but I think there are things that we could have people look at and see that what they think of as density is not necessarily the only thing around, and we shouldn't just be afraid of density because we have bad experiences maybe from what we saw before. I did have a question about the Hidden Grove, and I was trying to remember, I looked at the map briefly. They're not putting in Dock Barnes Drive, but would reserve the space for it. I was trying to remember, are they crossing the wetlands at all themselves, or is all that part coming in from King Road? And the reason I
have a road that crosses the wetlands, Jean, in their plan.
Okay, so my question from that is, since roads across wetlands have to be approved by Army Corps, and we know from the village experience that they couldn't put it where they wanted, and they had to put it where Army Corps said they could, and that ended up being down at Dock Barnes Drive. If we do this pre-application, if they are going to have to go back to Army Corps of Engineers and get approved for a different site, do they have to do that before we can count the pre-application as in or not? And because if that's the site that's in the EIR, the approved site, and they have to get a different approved site, doesn't that kind of mess with the existing EIR? And how does that work with us having to accept a pre-application?
Andreas, could you answer that one? I think the simple answer is the pre-application can come in as long as it complies with the general plan. The existing EIR has nothing to do with the pre-application, but we'll look at that for the application. So, but Andreas, you're really up to speed on the requirements.
So Army Corps of Engineer approval is not one of the steps in the pre-application process. So I think my short answer to that is no, they don't have to go talk to the Army Corps before we deem a pre-application to have been submitted. But I think at this point, I'd also like to again stress that we're getting awfully low to the ground on our high level overview here. So I think moving on from the Hidden Grove project might be a constructive use of our time.
I think Bonnie's on the right track by saying we shouldn't be looking specifically only at, you know, this particular project, which may or may not be what goes in, but what do we want and what would we like to see? I was concerned with the village that they basically wiped out the commercial because it's more profitable for them to put in housing. But there was a lot of testimony from the public that they wanted some more commercial there, and they wanted the opportunity to have commercial in office that was right there in Loomis. And so if we're looking at what might we want instead of what we're being offered right now, that probably needs to be looked at again in the context of the market survey and some things like that, to see if we want to be this to be a walkable community with the amenities that people want, you know, close, then that probably needs to be looked at again as far as should we be putting something back into the plan if it's the plan that we want, not what we're offered.
That is in fact what we're doing. So if you want to add some different land uses in the area and ignore the hatched mark, you're fine with me. What I just heard, and I'm hoping the rest of the subcommittee can verify or not, is it's not density you don't like, it's ugly you don't like. And ugly we can deal with in the plan. If it's a variety of types and densities, then we can deal with the ugly piece, and the committee then can concentrate on what walkable looks like, what access looks like, and what mixed use looks like. You know, mixed use in the context of, you know, putting this area in a blender and saying, okay, we want an opportunity for somebody to have an office that they can walk to from their home and then walk their children to school and play and those sorts of things. So what does the rest of the subcommittee think about density is fine as long as it's not hideous and doesn't look like all the other crud that has been churned out by the building industry for a while now? I thought Gene put it in a great phrase, but those are my words. I've seen pictures from others on Alley Loaded. So what I took from that is, in your rural community, you'd rather not see a bunch of cars parked on the street. Well, that's something we can do in a land use element. I like the idea of 2-story, maybe it's 2.5-story, to allow the peaked roofs. Maybe we concentrate more on the height, although one of the things I would caution you on is a crafty architect can get something, it can get 3 floors in 35 feet. So if you would rather have a pitched roof, and I know that seems like it's in the weeds, but if that's one of the ways that you define the character of your town, then that needs to go in the document. Those are the sorts of things that come to mind.
Jesse?
Just as a note, the general plan does not allow 2-story buildings basically along the northern border. Any place there's existing residential development, it's limited to 1 story.
Is that even if it's adjacent residential, or specifically if it's adjacent residential?
Specifically, any residential within the undeveloped area adjacent to existing residential cannot be greater than 1 story.
Okay. Existing at the time of that seems rather odd, Andy, but okay. Just at what point, right? Is it proposed? If there's already a house there, but that's me getting in the weeds on, what does that mean?
It's basically the northern border of these properties, and the western border on the north side is where that would apply. So okay. The 2 existing subdivisions, those houses will not have a 2-story house looking into their backyard.
So there would need to be at least 1 layer of housing at a single story, and then it could go to 2-story?
Correct.
Okay. That's actually pretty common in many communities for infill.
Jesse had his hand up.
Yep.
Thank you. I would like a definition of what do we call walkable neighborhoods?
Good one.
To me, walkable neighborhood just means a sidewalk.
I wouldn't call a walkable neighborhood just a sidewalk, Jesse. I would like to see some off-road trail that maybe connects the communities. In most of Northern California, particularly in mill towns, it was really common to have a paseo, although they didn't call it that. We had houses that opened onto a parkway. And the parkway was a sidewalk, and there were trails that went through there, and you parked on the alley, but your front of your house was on this piece. So that's one design. There are others where you would have an open space area like a wetland or like an area that's being preserved, and there would be trails. If you're next to a roadway, okay, I'll tolerate that because I love to walk. But I mean, I live in a neighborhood that's got paved streets and sidewalks. It's boring as dirt, but if I can get to a trail, to me, that's a little different. Now, to an urbanist, a walkable neighborhood is how far from your place of living can you get to a cup of coffee, a clean shirt, and some groceries, right? And they actually have walkability scores you can look up on the internet for various communities, I think throughout the United States. So if you Google that, you can see that. And they take those things into account. But really, it's up to what the town wants. Because as you can just see from that definition, it's everywhere. I know that you love to walk. And you know, you can walk along Horseshoe Bar Road, but I don't think that would be a very good experience. And we can even fiddle with the design of the roadway. So you can have, and we talked a little bit about this before, if you have a rural community, maybe you don't have a paved sidewalk next to the road. Maybe it's a trail that's behind a park strip. I grew up in England, and it's really common there to have a footpath or a trail that is parallel to the road, but offset by a few feet. So you're not walking next to cars, you're walking next to trees that are next to cars. So I can also tell you my wife hates that because if you get out of the car on the passenger side, you get into mud, but we won't go there.
Jesse, go ahead.
My concern is when you say walkable, I look at Day Avenue. Day Avenue has no sidewalks. I would not consider that a walkable neighborhood. So, and when you talk about trails, I'm thinking more open space and parks, not to get to a restaurant, not to get to a school. To me, they're two different things we're talking about.
Fair enough. I as a planner, I don't look at it that way, but I can see how you would look at it that way. That's very cool. Why couldn't you have a trail system that helped you walk through the park and go get a cup of coffee? Just putting that out there as an idea. But what is the rest of the, if you were to design this area, you know, ignoring all of the previous activity, let's call this tabula rasa, white piece of paper, completely blank. Would you want a trail that led to the supermarket and Starbucks, mecca for all caffeine addicts? I'm not a particular fan, but caffeine folks like to go to Starbucks. Would you want to be able to hop on a bicycle to get there or walk? And would you want to do that along a network of streets? Or would you want maybe an interior roadway system or a trail system that maybe connected a pocket park with a pond or open space and then had houses fronting on it? I mean, what would you like to see there?
I like the trail idea taking its places. I think Folsom, some areas of Folsom and some areas of Rancho both have that, where you can go from a housing area and then go off on a trail and you can end up over in a shopping area without actually having to be on the street dealing with cars. That'd be amazing if we could get that.
And to add on to the other members' points, my wife and I live on Angela Drive, and we frequently walk downtown to like Mr. Pickles, a sandwich shop, and we like to walk down there. It's about a mile, from our house, and then walking back along Webb Road. So it'd be nice to have something that we can walk. I've walked to Raley's before just to get out and get a little exercise, but yeah, walking down Horseshoe Bar is not a good experience. So if there was a way to have a better experience for that, that'd be great. Just coming from, we were living in Orangevale before we moved to Loomis, and I remember walking down to the Safeway. You're walking down a road that's 50 miles an hour. It's basically a highway, and it's just a bike path, and so there's no sidewalk. And that was when I was like, I'm living in a neighborhood that has sidewalks, and so that's why we moved into Angela Drive. But yeah, that's a it'd be really nice to be able to walk around the town and not have to worry about your kids getting hit by cars.
Madam Chair, oh, go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, I agree with, I believe that was Patrick. Was that Patrick? Well, I think to me, walkable, safety is a huge issue. And I'd love to have trails everywhere, as well. But I think that's one of the biggest, things for me for walkable is safety. And we have plenty of room to walk along the railroad tracks, but that's not necessarily an enjoyable place to walk. I know some areas they can, make the area along the tracks much nicer. I don't know. Union Pacific probably would not like that. I have no idea, but the other thing I think we have to take into consideration for that property is, we may not mind density, so to speak, and there, to Gene's point, there's a lot of ways of, hiding, or going away from the traditional apartments, what people think of. Some great pictures like what Bonnie had referred to. But I think what density also causes is more traffic. And I think that's the biggest issue that a lot of people had with that. And besides alleys, that not all alleys are created equal, as Bonnie pointed out. So I'll just leave it at that. But to the walkability issue, I agree. I think it's nice being able to walk to a coffee shop or the Loomis Basin Brewery. It'd be preferable on a trail, but sidewalks are nice. I think sidewalks are good. Thanks.
So let me.
Madam Chair, I have.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. I have Carrie attending that has had her hand raised for a little bit. If I can let her in.
Yes, that'd be great.
Okay, Carrie, go ahead. You just have to unmute. There you go.
Sorry, system kind of cuts out sometimes. Having walkability via trails, via sidewalks, and making sure that there's safety and stuff in there, I think is awesome, because that to me is part of kind of the heart of what Loomis is. And so that would help that. And then Jeff just addressed one of the other things that I wanted to mention as far as the prior plan for the villages. To me, there was just ugly upon ugly in that. And so if there's density, but it's not ugly, that is a very good thing, but don't want the whole area to be, really dense because of the traffic problems and stuff like that. So basically just redundant of what Jeff just said. And that's it.
Thank you, Carrie.
And Jean had her hand up. Jean.
You're muted, Jean.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. I don't remember who said it. Maybe it was Mark, maybe it's somebody else. Something about we don't want to see cars parked on the street. And I don't know if that is really the case. That was a selling point of the village, that they'll put all the cars in the back in the garages and we won't have to see cars along the street. But I don't know if the people of Loomis were saying we don't want to see cars parked on the street. One of the big concerns was that they were not providing sufficient parking for the people that live there, but for any guests that would be coming. And all the people that live all the people that live in the village are not just going to have friends that live in the village in walkable areas. Obviously, people have friends coming from outside that area who do need a place to park. And I didn't hear anybody saying, don't let them park on the street. So I think, you know, I could be wrong, but I don't remember the citizenry particularly saying, don't have parking on the street. I heard a lot more of there's not sufficient parking, by which they meant street parking. So if other people can take a different position, maybe they heard something different than I did.
Mark, you wanna? Mark.
Yeah, I did in fact say that because I've been shown pictures by others that are emailing me pictures of things they like, and what they disliked were small driveways in front of garages, and planners refer to those as snout houses, where you have all you really see is the garage door. You don't actually see the front door. You'd rather see a porch with somebody, not necessarily saying that you couldn't park on the street, but often when you have an alley, you narrow up the street frontage because otherwise you're doubling the amount of pavement. And that would seem to be more expensive and also not necessarily what the town would be looking for. But I just threw it out there because I thought that's what I heard. And it doesn't mean that you can't park on the street. Maybe you don't allow, maybe you allow it and you just have the street open wide. You know, there's no hill to die on that one. I know that parking is almost a religion in California. And I don't wish to broach that subject at this level. Suffice it to say that obviously it would have to follow whatever the regulations are for parking. But since I'm not a big fan of parking lots, let's talk about something Jesse brought up. Do we think that the town wants sidewalks on all of their streets? Or is it more rural to only have sidewalks on main streets or one sidewalk? I'm trying to get back to this definition of what rural means in town. Certainly in the business district, you want people to be able to park once and wander around. That's a pretty well-established fact that if you're driving by at whatever speed you're driving by, it's really hard to spend money in your town. So if you get people out of their car, they can walk around and spend some cash, which is what you're hoping for if you're a business owner. So the question I have is for those areas that feed into the downtown, and you're envisioning a rural town, does rural involve sidewalk on both sides of the streets, sidewalk on busy streets, but maybe not on other streets? Because I've been in other communities where a rural road is one that doesn't have sidewalks. In fact, I'm working in a very large community right now where parts of their community, they're changing their design standards to eliminate sidewalks in the rural parts of their town as part of the street standards. They'd rather have the swale that helps with storm water, and then they just put a trail along there, and it's only on one side of the street. So what does the subcommittee think of things like that?
It's an interesting point because this area will, it has some older neighborhoods, but not the oldest neighborhood. The oldest neighborhood is actually south and over there in Magnolia and Callison and Oak, and they don't have any sidewalks over there. And that would be an interesting question I'd like to hear from the committee as well. If you don't have sidewalks, would you want them? What do you guys think?
Hi, Jen. This is Patrick. Just from my experience, from what I told you guys earlier about walking down the high traffic roads without any sidewalk, I wouldn't move to a house that didn't have a sidewalk. Like I said, we live over in Angela Drive, and this is a perfect, small town feeling for me. The houses they're all kind of different. A lot of the same floor plans, but the exteriors are all different. It might have been 30 years of building on it, but it doesn't look like cookie cutter. And the roads are wide. There's schools nearby, and you're close enough to town if you want to walk on in. So this area is kind of the perfect definition of what rural is to me, and what I would like to see more of in Loomis.
Thank you.
Patrick, does it have sidewalks on both sides of those wide streets?
Yeah, sidewalks on both sides, Mark. If you're ever in town, please, take a drive down Angela Drive. I love it. It's wide streets, so you can actually park probably 4 cars across, 2 on the side, and have people passing by each other. So wide streets and wide sidewalks with kind of the storm drain, not the hard drop off, but it's kind of a well.
Yeah, but it's an interesting notion, because I would really like to know what the people over in Magnolia and Callison and Oak think, because that's such an old and historical part of our town. Just wonder what they would think about that. It's really interesting. The other thing that I wanted to mention is talking about being walkable. There's going to be looks like there's eventually going to be higher density in this area. It's just gonna be a lot of kids. And I think that it would be great for us to make sure that those kids have a safe trail to school or safe walking area. And I know that there's a little gate, I think off of Sun Knoll or Thornwood over there, that is a little safe area that the kids can go into that very corner of the school. And I mean, at some point, I think this area with a potential project is going to bring a lot of kids, and I would suggest putting a trail or something safe to get them to the school.
Jesse, go ahead.
Jan hit it perfectly. That was one of the discussions on how we were going to get kids to Loomis Grammar, up near the corner of King and Taylor. You're right, there's 2 gates on Thornwood that comes in the back way to the school. But with Sun Knoll being blocked, it was going to push all the kids over to Day Avenue. Day Avenue is an older street with no sidewalks on either side, but there is street parking on both sides. So that was a huge concern, how we loop kids back around one end and then loop them back out to Taylor. Taylor has been redone, so it definitely looks good with the sidewalks and the bikeable area. But like you point out, Jen, how do we loop them back around on the sidewalks to get them safely to school?
Yeah. And then Mark, you talked about access. Were you wanting us to talk about a road access point to these parcels, or were you talking about something else?
I think it's important, because where you provide vehicular access or even pedestrian access, but particularly vehicular access, you create an interest point, you create a focus. Corners and intersections are traditionally areas where things happen, where you have a lot of activity and where you have visibility. So if you're going to have a business, you want to be on a corner, right? If you have a business that's going to be catering to people, you want to be in a corner where people are going to be walking or near. So where those happens kind of makes sense. Now I know you're kind of hamstrung here a little bit because I haven't given you a wetlands map. We're going to steal that from the EIR and see what we can do here to help you with that. That's really going to help, I think, talk about land uses a little bit. My planner's rule is don't mess with wetlands. The feds have more time and money than you do. But you know, we'll see how that goes, but that's how I do it. I did actually find, I think this is what Jesse was talking about. This is the entry.
Mm-hmm.
And good on you for doing stuff like this. This is the type of stuff that I love, that to me makes a small rural town, right? Mm-hmm. This is the sort of thing you often don't see in urban environments. I love it. I'm not real wild about this, but I get it. You need to slow the kids down. This would never have slowed me down as a kid, by the way. I would just jump those or anyway. But I love this as an idea. These are perfect. And honestly, this ought to be a policy in your general plan, that we make darn sure that you must connect to a trail and you must provide access like this, so that we don't end up with a walled city. That is just not, it's antithetical to everything I've heard from all of the subcommittees and committees we've been working with. So, I mean, if this is something that is okay, and the best time to do this, obviously, is when before the development gets there, right? Because doing it afterwards is all sorts of issues. But anyway, this is pretty cool stuff. This is the sort of thing that you would work with the police department on as well, because you need to have visibility. You need to make sure they can see. We can also need to make sure it isn't a way of mischief on either side, being able to scarper when they need to. But I love stuff like this. These you only know about if you're local, right? You know to go here, and the parents know to go here. And anyway, this is cool stuff. Need more of this everywhere, not just in your downtown, but everywhere.
Okay, the only other thing that I would say is if you want to talk about access, a Doc Barnes extension is absolutely crucial, because when we're talking about bringing in a higher density project, we're bringing in people, and those people have to have, we have to have access to both King Road and to Library Drive and then Horseshoe Bar Road. And if we don't, we're just going to be adding to a very horrible traffic situation as it is. Not to mention safety. I mean, I wouldn't want to live in the RM there in the middle, in the very corner, right up by King Road, and need to get out, and I can't get out on King. I have to go all the way through this dense project in order to get out to Horseshoe Bar Road. So I think that's of critical importance.
As a planner, I will tell you that we look at density of intersections per square mile. We look at grid systems. Planners love grids. We hate cul-de-sacs, which doesn't make us very popular with realtors who love cul-de-sacs and hate grid systems. We're pretty popular with the public safety folks too, for that very reason that you just mentioned, Chair, is that more access to your neighborhood is safer than less access to your neighborhood. And I know that's antithetical to all of the horror stories you hear about, things, and people love cul-de-sacs. We still played kick the can in our neighborhood. We just stopped when a car came by. Do kids still do that? I don't know. In my neighborhood, there's basketball hoops everywhere. And as you drive through my neighborhood, you darn well better slow down, because you might wipe out somebody's basketball or hit a basketball hoop that's fallen over in the wind. I love it. And to me, it's natural traffic calming, because it's all about the kids as far as I'm concerned. But absolutely, access and those types of things is something that we would address in the general plan. This map is a little, Andy, I'm sorry. This map is a little the P in here for public and quasi-public. I'm hoping to refine that with some actual information from the EIR to show where the wetlands are, because it's a little confusing to me, because it makes it look like that whole area is public land, and I'm not certain that boundary matches what it's supposed to match. So I'll circle back with you and Christy on that.
Okay. Just something for the committee to consider. On the Southeast Committee, there was a discussion of, as you drive along Interstate 80, the character of Loomis should be showing up. One of the things you may want to consider is having a policy in the general plan that would have a natural buffer adjacent to the freeway, 100 to 200 feet wide, that basically would just be its current natural environment with the oak trees. And then if anything, you would just have peaks through to development on the other side. The city of Folsom did that on Highway 50 from Folsom Boulevard over to almost to Broad, whatever that is. They made it 100 feet, and you can still see peaks of buildings, but as you drive down Highway 50, all you see is pretty much hills and oak trees. So it's something to consider here that also can be used for access, and that would go into that feeling of possibly, as you drive down Interstate 80, you're in Lewis because it's rural looking.
Hey, anybody else have any questions?
I was just going to say, I really like that point, and I think it goes to what the comment that Jean had made in that meeting about when we were trying to define what rural is, and it being the natural landscaping and open space.
Yeah, that's a good point, Bonnie. I think natural landscaping, Mark, is one of the things that we didn't write it down, but definitely leaving the natural contour, landscape, vegetation is, I think, part of the thing that makes it look rural.
So Anders, if that's something that the committee wants to see, will you include that or what does the committee think about that idea, I guess, is how would our modus operandi be for putting that in?
If that's something the committee wants to see, I don't know if a vote is required at this point, but a consensus might be helpful, and then we'll have Mark put that in.
Okay.
If it pleases the chair, I've got some amazing notes from both committee meetings, which for those of you that don't do this regularly, these have both been very productive meetings, and I applaud all of you for doing some of the hard work. Let me write these up. Let me put them in a PowerPoint presentation, and we can talk about it. And then perhaps at the next meeting, the committee can come to consensus on that, and then wordsmith it a little bit. And I'll try to get it up to Mary Beth and Andy and Christy well in advance of that meeting, so you can do any wordsmithing you want to do before that. Would that please everyone? And then you can see it and touch it. I'm not a very good verbal guy, so if I can see it, I can play with it.
Right, and then you'll have all the pictures too. And then if the committees could keep sending those pictures, or give them a couple weeks at least before the next meeting, then we'll have lots of things to look at.
Madam Chair, Miguel had his hand raised, so I brought him in.
All right.
Right. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, couple points. We live in Sunrise, Loomis, and we really like the sidewalks. We can walk all around. You see a lot of people, and that's been mentioned. Secondly, the Grove, the town of Loomis has a park requirement of 5 acres per 1,000, and that a minimum park be 3.5 acres. And so if we're to consider the Grove, I would hope that they would follow those standards. And then question I have is the zoning that I see there on the map, because the other zoning had commercial and office professional buildings, but I see, is that included in this new zoning?
Nope.
No, this is the land use designations, and that is not included in the land use designation.
Was this the land use that was changed, or is this the land use that's been there for a long time?
This is the land use that was adopted with the village project and was not removed. So this continues to be the adopted land use in the general plan.
Okay, so the economic study that was done, it showed that there was a need for commercial and professional building. And I think that ought to be considered some for this site, especially along Horseshoe Bar for the commercial, and then in the back for professional. And then they have to follow the zoning ordinance as far as setbacks and side yards or not.
Yeah, we'll be talking with Andreas about that, Miguel, but because the zoning is not compliant, we probably have to go to the zoning that may not be adopted at this point in time, but is consistent with the land use designation for making those determinations. But that's something that we'll be talking with the attorneys about.
Okay, thank you.
So Mark, will you please add adding general commercial back into this area? Because I think Bonnie brought that up too. So we can discuss that.
One other thought in it, if you take a look at the uses along Interstate 80, the residential uses, I don't know, having housing, either multifamily or single family, backing up to the freeway doesn't seem desirable. So Mark, let's take a look at potential land use configurations to address that issue.
Absolutely, because if we don't do it correctly, you'll end up with the most god-awful, ugly sound wall. The aberration of the planet should never have been invented. I have an opinion about sound walls.
All right, is there any other questions from the public?
Seeing none.
Okay. How about committee members? Any more questions for tonight? Oh, Jean.
Unmute, Jean.
We currently do have a policy against sound walls, Mark, by the way. And the idea was that we didn't want to present a sound wall as the image of Loomis as people drove by. On the other hand, when I looked at the village, there was a sound wall for the first row of houses on the other side of Dock Barnes Drive. And I thought about, well, that didn't really make Dock Barnes Drive very pleasant for the people that might want to be walking along there with what, 40,000, 80,000, whatever, we've got cars a day and trucks going by. So our policy is not to have sound walls. We do have one area that they put in a berm, but that takes a lot of space to put in a berm. And I'm thinking, well, if we're going to have to do a berm, is that worth it? Are there ways to disguise a sound wall if that's what it really takes? And I was thinking about the 100 or 200 feet of buffer, and that sounds great, except this is a very valuable piece of land, and how much land is that going to take from the project? And are there ways you can kind of work in something? I don't know that it's practical to make downtown Loomis, not the street, but our core area, to make it look like that too should remain rural. I don't know if that's expected or necessary. That's something to think about, I guess. To what extent do we want that part of the freeway, that small part, to have to look semi-rural? I don't know. We should think about that. I do understand the point about putting something besides residential against the freeway. On the other hand, whatever we put there that's, say, commercial or office is going to be probably even worse for the traffic problem that we've already got at Horseshoe Bar. So these are different concepts that we should look at, but we're going to have to do some juggling, I think, for whatever we want to come up with. And I did have a comment on street width. One of the big complaints that we had for the village from people that live in Loomis was, don't make it like, is it Sunol? What is the one that
Sunol,
that backs up to the village? That street has, everybody complained that it was not wide enough for all the cars and trucks. Loomis has a lot of trucks that were parked there, and that was hardly big enough to pass, two vehicles to pass in the middle. And so they were wanting, don't let the village have such narrow streets as they wanted to put in, which I think was even narrower than we had up there. One of the things that bothered me a lot was the number of times that the village developers sort of proudly proclaimed, when we complained about street widths, well, we're already, with the alleys, we're already putting in more asphalt than we would if we just made a wider street. And as a person who is very concerned about heat island effect, there was no room to plant trees back there, and more asphalt or concrete. I didn't think that was a very pleasing proposal, to say we're going to put even more heat absorbent surface than if we widen the street a little bit. So that was one of the concerns of the public, not to make the streets as narrow as that subdivision turned out to be. That's all.
Excellent point, Jean. Thank you. Anybody else?
None.
Okay. I think this has been a really wonderful meeting for sure. We've certainly talked about many different things. We do have more homework ahead of us. And I appreciate Mark keeping tabs of all of our ideas and future points of conversation. And our next meeting is going to be May 20th at 6 p.m. And it's probably a lot of things are going to happen between now and May 20th. Seems like these days. So look forward to seeing you all then. And thank you very much for your strong work and your great love for our town. So with that, I'm going to adjourn our meeting tonight. Thank you all very, very much. Good night.
Thank you, everybody.
Good night.